She got rejected 7 times, until the richest cowboy walked by and chose her. The dust had barely settled when the door slammed in her face for the 7th time. Clara Reyes stood on the sun-cracked porch of the Dusty Boot Employment Agency in Vega Flats, Texas, her worn leather boots planted firmly on the wooden boards, her jaw tight and her brown eyes blinking hard against a sting that had nothing to do with the desert heat. 7 rejections in 4 days. The clerk inside, a round-faced man named Gerald who smelled of old coffee and bad decisions, had not even bothered to give her a reason this time. He had simply looked at her application, looked at her face, and shaken his head before closing the door with a sharp, final click. She did not cry. Clara Reyes had not cried since she was 11 years old. Standing beside her mother's grave in the red dirt of New Mexico with nothing in her pocket but a folded photograph and 42 cents. Crying had not helped then, and it would not help now. She tucked the rejection slip into her canvas bag alongside the other 6, straightened the collar of her faded blue shirt, and walked back down the steps into the blazing afternoon. Vega Flats was not a forgiving town. It had 3 saloons, 2 churches, 1 doctor who drank too much, and a reputation for chewing up people who arrived without connections and spitting them out before the week was done. Clara had arrived 6 days ago on a rattling coach with a letter of introduction from a rancher up in Amarillo who had since gone bankrupt. She had knocked on every ranch office door in the county, applied at the feed store, the grain mill, the veterinary supply house, and the livery stable. Every single door had either turned her away outright or given her the kind of polite smile that means no in every language ever spoken. The problem was not that she lacked skill. Clara could read livestock the way most people read books, could mend fencing in the dark by feel alone, knew how to stretch a water supply through a 6-week drought, and had kept 300 head of cattle alive through a blizzard 2 winters back, when a ranch foreman had been laid up with a broken collarbone. The problem, as far as she could tell, was that she was a woman who wanted to do work that the men of Vega Flats had decided was not meant for women. She stopped at the water trough on the edge of Main Street and splashed cold water on her face. She was calculating whether she had enough money left for one more night at the boarding house when she heard it. A horse coming in fast. Not the lazy trot of someone heading home, but hard, deliberate gallop that made the loose boards of the storefronts rattle. Clara stepped back against the wall out of pure instinct and watched the rider come down the middle of Main Street like a thunderstorm on 4 legs. The horse was the color of midnight, massive and clearly expensive. The man on its back was tall even in the saddle, broad across the shoulders, with a dark hat pulled low and trailed, dust caked on his jacket all the way to the collar. He pulled the horse to a stop directly in front of the employment agency with a precision that told Clara he had been riding his entire life. He dropped out of the saddle in one clean motion and was inside before the dust from his horse had finished settling. Clara noticed 2 things immediately. The horse was bleeding from a long cut along its left flank, shallow but fresh, and the animal was lathered from chest to belly, ridden hard and far. She walked over without thinking and began to assess the wound, running her hands carefully along the flank while the horse stood trembling. A wire tear. She had seen hundreds. She pulled a clean cloth from her bag and applied steady pressure, talking low to the horse the whole time in the way her mother had taught her, a wordless murmur that settled frightened animals like nothing else could. She was still working when the door opened and the tall man stepped back onto the porch. He stopped when he saw her. He was younger than she had expected, somewhere in his early 30s, with a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same red limestone that formed the canyon walls north of town. His eyes were the color of strong coffee, and they moved fast, taking the cloth, the horse, and her face in 2 seconds. "What are you doing to my horse?" he said. Not aggressive exactly, but direct in the way of a man who did not have time for anything that was not a straight answer. "Stopping the bleeding," Clara said, not taking her hands off the animal. "Wire cut along the left flank. Not deep, but it needs cleaning before you ride him anywhere." He stepped down from the porch and came around to look at what she was doing, close enough that she could smell trail dust and leather. He looked at the wound, looked at her hands, and said nothing for a moment. "You know horses," he said. It was not a question. "Better than most people know their own families," she said. He almost smiled. Not quite, but close. He looked back at the door of the employment agency, and something shifted in his face. "Gerald in there says he has nobody on his books who knows cattle management and can handle a working crew," he said. "Gerald in there has turned me down 7 times in the last 4 days," Clara said pleasantly. "So I would not put a great deal of faith in what Gerald tells you." The man went very still. He turned to look at her with attention that was different from before, sharper and more focused. 7 times, he repeated. 7. She pressed the cloth more firmly. "I applied at every ranch office in the county before I got to him. They all said no." "What did you apply for?" "Livestock management, crew coordination, range assessment, drought planning." She glanced at him briefly. "Whatever needed doing." He studied her for a moment that stretched longer than comfortable. Then he said, "My name is Alec Navarro. I run the Navarro operation out on the Cap Rock, 40,000 acres and about 900 head plus breeding stock. My ranch manager quit 3 days ago and took 2 of my best hands with him. I rode in today because I needed somebody fast, and Gerald was supposed to have a list." Clara kept her hand steady. She had heard of the Navarro operation. Everybody in 4 counties had. It was the largest private cattle ranch in the region, 3 generations in the family, the kind of land people discuss the way other people discuss kingdoms. "I see," she said. "You have references?" he said. "I had a letter from Hector Baines up in Amarillo, but Baines went bankrupt last month. So the letter is worth exactly as much as the paper is written on. I can give you names of hands I have worked with, a veterinarian in New Mexico who has known me for 8 years, and a water engineer who can tell you exactly what I did during the drought of 71. He reached out and held the cloth in place himself while he studied the wound again. "What did you do during the drought of 71? She told him, all of it, quickly and without embellishment, because she sensed that Alec Navarro would recognize it immediately and trust nothing after it. She described the water rotation she had designed, the feeding schedule, the decisions about which animals to move and which sections of range to rest. She told him about the hands she had managed, 3 of whom had been twice her age and none of whom had been pleased about taking direction from her. By the time she finished, he had tied the cloth in place with a strip from his own saddlebag and was looking at her with full, undivided attention. "You managed a crew that did not want to be managed by you," he said. "I managed them well enough that every animal came through," she said. They could not argue with the result. He took his hat off and ran a hand through his dark hair, pressed flat with sweat and dust. He looked like a man who had been riding for many hours and was dangerously low on time to solve a problem that had been keeping him awake for 3 straight days. "I have a situation up on the Cap Rock right now," he said. "The South Range has been drifting cattle because the fence line is down in 3 sections. My remaining hands cannot agree on how to prioritize the repairs, and they are making everything worse. I have a water source that may be silting up and nobody left who can assess it properly. I have breeding stock that needs evaluation before the season ends." He looked at her directly. "Can you handle all of that?" Clara met his eyes without blinking. "Yes," she said. Something settled in his face. The tension did not disappear, but organized itself differently. The way a storm stops being chaotic once it commits to a direction. $30 a month, a private bunkroom, and meals," he said. "If the operation is running clean in 60 days, we talk about a permanent arrangement and better terms." $30 a month was more than any of the 7 doors had offered her, and every single one of those 7 doors had said no before an offer could even be made. Clara did not let the surprise show. "When do we leave?" she said. They left within the hour. The ride to the Navarro operation took 3 hours through country that shifted from flat scrubland into the dramatic broken terrain of the Cap Rock escarpment, where the land dropped in red sandstone cliffs and the wind moved through the canyon cuts with a sound like something alive. Clara used the time to study the land, building a picture in her mind of how water would move, how cattle would drift in heat, and where the terrain would create problems before winter. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was going low and painting everything the color of copper. The Navarro headquarters was a serious operation, a stone and timber main house, for large outbuildings, corrals, a proper barn, and a bunkhouse that could sleep 20 men. 7 hands stood near the corral fence doing very little that was useful, and Clara could tell from their posture alone that morale had been sliding hard since the manager walked out. A man named Dante Cruz came forward as they rode in. He was somewhere past 50, with a gray mustache and the careful eyes of someone who had seen a great deal and drawn honest conclusions from every bit of it. He looked at Clara with no readable expression, which she respected more than most reactions she had encountered. Dante Aldrich said, "This is Clara Reyes. She is the new operations manager. Do what she tells you." Dante studied her for a moment. Then he said, "The south fence is down in 3 sections. We have not been able to agree on where to start. Take me out there at first light," Clara said. "Tonight, I want confirmed head counts and a full report on the east tank water situation." She was not asking. She said it the way you say things when you already know they're going to happen. Dante nodded once. "All right," he said. What followed was the hardest 60 days of Clara's working life, and she had not had an easy working life to begin with. The south fence situation was worse than described because 2 of the down sections were in terrain where machinery was useless, and every repair had to be done by hand and on horseback. The water source was silting exactly as suspected, and fixing it required redirecting a secondary channel, which meant 3 days of labor standing in mud past the knees. 3 of the hands tested her authority in the small ways men always tested someone new, arriving late, doing partial work, watching to see what happened next. What happened was that she pulled each one aside privately and spoke plainly and without anger. She did not embarrass anyone in front of the others. She made clear what the work required and what the consequences of not doing it would be. By the 3rd week, all 3 worked as hard as anyone on the property. Aldrich was present for some of it and away for stretches of 3 or 4 days when business pulled him elsewhere. When he returned, he would ride the range with Clara in the evenings and listen while she explained what had been accomplished and what remained. He asked sharp questions and she gave honest answers, including the times when something had not gone as planned. She noticed he listened the way very few people ever did, completely, without preparing his next words while she was still speaking. On the 45th day, a small, precise lawyer named Portillo arrived from the county seat carrying papers from Gerald at the employment agency, claiming Clara had misrepresented her credentials. It was entirely untrue. Clara had kept copies of every document she had ever submitted, and the accusations collapsed in under 10 minutes when Aldrich sat at his desk and went through them with the patient steadiness of a man not frightened by legal theater. Portillo left looking embarrassed and said nothing more. Aldrich sat back in his chair and looked at Clara across the desk. "Gerald does not like being made to look foolish," he said quietly. "Gerald made himself look foolish," she said simply. "I only showed up." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Why did you keep going? After the 7th rejection, why did you not leave Vega Flats and try somewhere else?" It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. Because I did not have the coach fare, and because I knew the work was here and I was capable of doing it. Leaving before you have done the thing you came to do is a habit that gets easier every single time. I did not want to make it a habit. He was quiet for a long stretch after that. Outside the stone-framed window, the Caprock country spread away in the last orange light, enormous and beautiful in a way that only hard country manages to be. "The 60 days are almost up," he said. 45 down, 15 to go, she said. "The breeding stock is assessed, the water situation is resolved, the fence is repaired, and the crew is working properly," he said, looking at her rather than any written record. "The operation is running cleaner than it has in 3 years. He paused. "I am not offering you $30 a month. I am offering you full partnership in the operational management of this ranch, $60 a month, and a stake in the breeding program when it begins producing profit." He looked at her steadily. "And I am asking you to stay, not only for the work." The last part landed differently from everything before it. Clara met his eyes. She was not a woman who had spent her life expecting things to go her way. She had not spent much time thinking about what she wanted beyond the next problem to solve and the next stretch of land to understand. But she knew, sitting in that room with the Caprock light coming through the window and Aldrich watching her with those direct, honest eyes, that the 7 doors which had closed in her face were not cruelty or misfortune. They had been a path, clearing away the wrong places one by one until she arrived at the right one. "The breeding program has real potential," she said carefully, "but you will need to bring in 2 separate bloodlines or you'll be facing serious problems by the 3rd generation." "I know," he said. "I was hoping you would help me select them." You should also have the east fence checked again before the weather turns, she said. One post anchored near the canyon edge is not set as deep as it appears. Clara, he said. Yes, she said. I will stay. Outside, the wind moved through the canyon cuts with that low alive sound, and the last light held on the red stone walls of the caprock. And the Navarro cattle moved slow and sailed across the south range where the grass had come back strong since the water ran clean. In the morning, Clara rose before the sun as always, pulled on her boots in the gray pre-dawn dark, and walked out the corral where Aldrich's midnight horse stood quiet and fully healed. She ran her hand along the long scar on its flank, smooth now and fading fast. The horse turned its great head and looked at her with one calm, dark eye. 7 doors, one right one. She heard boots on the ground behind her and did not need to turn around to know who it was. The east fence, Aldrich said. After breakfast, she said. They stood together in the growing light while the ranch came alive around them, and Vega Flats and its 7 closed doors felt like something from a different life, which was exactly what it was.